Welcome in, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into project mechanics. Yeah, we've got a whole stack of Mark Hazelton's work here, and I'm really excited to see what we can pull out of it for you guys. You know, if you're listening, you're probably an IT leader or a project manager, which means you already know the pain of projects going wrong.
Yeah, Hazelton's work really speaks to those folks. You know, he's been there, he's done that. He's got a lot of experience in software development and client delivery. So his methodology, project mechanics, really comes from that real world experience.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me just in skimming through this is that he doesn't seem to be trying to reinvent the wheel. Would you say that that's accurate?
Absolutely, yeah. Project mechanics is about taking proven strategies and tailoring them to fit each project. It blends structured techniques with that agile problem-solving mindset that's so important, you know, in our world today.
So it's not like a rigid set of rules. It's more of a toolbox that you can pull from.
Exactly, yeah. He really focuses on three core pillars: clear communication, efficient planning, and agile response to change. And he emphasizes that you need to understand the project scope so well that you can pretty much predict potential roadblocks or even project failure before you even begin.
Wow, that's a powerful concept. It sounds like he's trying to take some of that uncertainty out of project management. Does he get into specifics of how to achieve that?
He does, and that's where his breakdown of the project lifecycle really comes in. He breaks it down into a bunch of different stages, starting with what he calls future opportunity.
That sounds kind of philosophical for project management methodology. What's he getting at with that?
So this is the very beginning, when a project is just an idea. And Hazelton really stresses that it's super important to not allocate any resources yet, or start putting together a team. At this stage, it's all about exploration, making sure that the project is even worth doing in the first place.
So keeping it lean, keeping it focused from the start. I can see how that would appeal to IT leaders who are always, super busy. So what comes after that in this project life cycle?
So the next phase he calls project definition. Now, this is where you start to assign a team, and where Hazelton really gets down to brass tacks. He emphasizes figuring out the ROI right here. Like, is this project actually going to be worth the investment?
That's such a key question, and I think one that a lot of us overlook. In the excitement of a new project, I know I've been guilty of that in the past.
Yeah.
Getting so caught up in the what that I forget to really ask why.
Yeah, that's a common trap. But Hazelton gives you a way to avoid it. So once you've figured out the ROI, you move into the proposed phase. And here is where you're outlining what are the metrics for approval, and what are the deadlines. And then if everything goes well, you move to approved. Then in progress.
Okay, so the very deliberate, step-by-step process. He's not rushing into anything.
Right.
What happens when a project's finished?
So Hazelton actually has a complete stage, which is more than just checking off that final deliverable. He emphasizes making a formal transition of the completed project into ongoing support. And then there's the stage that we often forget about, the canceled stage.
It's interesting that he includes that specifically. Most methodologies just kind of gloss over that possibility.
I think it really speaks to his data-driven approach, recognizing that not every project is going to succeed. That's key to making smart decisions and learning from your experiences.
I'm starting to see how this could be helpful to our listeners. It's not just about finishing projects. It's about finishing them in a way that's efficient and transparent and ultimately leads to success.
Exactly. And Hazelton doesn't stop at just laying out these concepts. He actually provides concrete steps for putting project mechanics into action.
Okay.
He doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk.
So what are some of those steps?
Well, he starts with what he calls project analysis. And this is where you really dig into those core questions, not just what needs to be done, but why are we doing it? What benefits are we expecting? And this is a big one. How will we know when it's actually done?
Okay, those sound like pretty basic questions, though. What makes Hazelton's approach different?
It's about asking those questions in a way that forces you to be clear and to make sure everyone's on the same page. Those stakeholders. I can't tell you how many times I've seen projects go sideways because those initial questions weren't asked or answered properly.
I've been there. Everyone's nodding along in the kickoff meeting. But then a few weeks later, it's like, wait a minute. We're all picturing something totally different. Hazelton could have saved us a lot of trouble.
For sure. So once you've got the what and the why figured out, then you move into project planning. This is where you map out the WN, the WHR, and the HOW. Hazelton says it's important to identify not just the tasks themselves, but also those dependencies and constraints that can really trip you up.
Oh, yeah, dependencies and constraints. Those are like the hidden landmines of project management. You think you've got it all under control, and then bam, you're stuck waiting for something. Vendor approval or a key team member is out sick.
Exactly. And Hazelton's framework helps you see those things coming. He even takes it a step further with project design. This is where you really flesh out that solution. It's not enough to have a high-level plan. You got to get into the nitty-gritty of how it's all going to work.
That level of detail can be kind of daunting at first.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense in the long run. You're preventing those expensive reworks later on.
Exactly. And speaking of expensive, Hazelton has some really interesting things to say about project estimation, which I think is an area where a lot of IT leaders struggle.
Estimation. Every project manager's worst nightmare. I can't even count how many times I've underestimated how long something's going to take.
Right. And Hazelton points out some of the traps we fall into, like underestimating management time. We think, oh, I can just squeeze that in during the day. But he makes it clear that managing a big project, especially in IT, takes serious time and focus.
It's like we're trying to convince ourselves that we can bend time. Like, oh yeah, I can definitely fit one more thing into my schedule. Hazelton brings us back to reality.
He does. And he also highlights the need to account for expenses. Those contingencies that we always hope we won't need, but inevitably do. And then there's the proficiency levels of your team members.
Oh, that's a good one. Assuming everyone's at the same skill level can really throw off your calculations.
Absolutely. And he doesn't stop there. He talks about documentation time, assumptions about network access, and building in enough time for tuning and transitioning the project. All those little details that can make or break things.
It's like he's shining a light on all the cracks where projects can fall apart. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? He offers some solutions, too.
Right. One thing that really stood out to me is his emphasis on the role of the PMO, the Program Management Office. He sees it as more than just a bureaucratic thing.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people kind of have a negative view of the PMO, like they're just there to slow things down with paperwork.
Yeah. Hazelton challenges that perception.
Right.
He sees the PMO as a strategic partner, like a central hub for all that project management expertise, best practices, standardized methodologies.
Though instead of being a roadblock, the PMO can actually help projects run smoother.
Exactly. He argues that the PMO can help ensure consistency and coordination across all your projects, which is especially valuable in big organizations where you've got multiple projects going at the same time.
That makes sense. You're not reinventing the wheel for each project.
Right.
So what kind of specific functions does Hazelton see the PMO fulfilling?
Well, he outlines several key functions, things like project governance and oversight, developing methodologies and processes, managing resources, communication and stakeholder engagement, and really important performance monitoring and reporting.
Wow, that's a pretty broad scope. Sounds like the PMO is involved in every stage of the project.
They are, but Hazelton is clear that their role is to support, not to replace individual project managers. Think of them more like a coach, guiding the team towards success.
I like that analogy. It's more about facilitation than dictation. Does Hazelton give any examples of how that PMO support actually plays out in practice?
He talks about the importance of communication within the PMO, different levels of communication, from high-level strategy discussions down to those detailed tactical updates. He even provides guidelines for conducting effective project meetings, which we all know can be a real time suck if they're not done right.
Oh, meetings. A necessary evil. What's Hazelton's take on making them more efficient?
He stresses having a clear purpose for the meeting, a design agenda, and a facilitator who can keep things on track and make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
That all sounds good in theory. But we've all been in those meetings that go off on tangents and end up accomplishing nothing. Does Hazelton have any practical tips for avoiding that?
He does. One technique he suggests is using something called a parking board.
A parking board. What's that?
It's basically a designated space for capturing ideas or topics that come up, but aren't really relevant to the agenda at hand. So you can acknowledge those contributions without derailing the entire discussion.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting where someone brings up a valid point.
Yeah.
But it's just not the right time to discuss it. A parking board would let you capture those ideas and come back to them later.
Exactly. It's a simple way to stay focused while still valuing everyone's input. Hazelton also offers some guidance on facilitating brainstorming sessions, emphasizing the need for a safe and open environment where people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts.
That psychological safety is so important. If people are afraid to speak up because they're worried about being judged, you're going to miss out on some great ideas.
Absolutely. He also provides some tips for dealing with those classic facilitation challenges.
Yeah.
You know, like when you have a dominant personality in the room,
Yeah.
or people who tend to go off on tangents.
Ah, yes. The 7 deadly sins of facilitation.
He's seen it all, and he offers some practical advice for navigating those situations and keeping the discussion productive.
It sounds like he's really got a handle on, making meetings work. But meetings are just one part of it, right?
Yeah.
What else does Hazelton talk about?
Well, he digs into another crucial aspect, defining roles and responsibilities. He says it's got to be crystal clear who's doing what to avoid confusion and duplicated effort. And, ultimately those delays that everyone hates.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've seen projects grind to a halt because nobody knew who was supposed to be doing what. It just turns into a blame game. And nobody wants to take responsibility when things go wrong.
Right. And Hazelton gives you a framework for setting up those roles, communicating them clearly, and even revising them as the project changes. He's all about being flexible and adaptable because projects are rarely ever static.
That adaptability is so important, especially in IT where things move so fast. But I guess too much flexibility can lead to scope creep and those dreaded delays. How does Hazelton address that?
Well, he has a really helpful checklist for project managers when they're first assigned to a project. He says it's crucial to understand the project's history, the current status, and any outstanding issues before you even start trying to make changes.
That's a good point. It's tempting to just jump in and start doing things. But taking the time to do your homework up front can save you a lot of headaches later. So it seems like Hazelton covers a lot of ground, from communication to planning to execution. He's got advice for every step of the way.
He really does. He breaks down each stage of the project lifecycle from that initial future opportunity phase all the way to complete and even canceled, which, as we talked about earlier, is an important stage that often gets overlooked.
That attention to detail is pretty impressive. It's like he's thought of every possible pitfall and given you a way to avoid it.
He has a real knack for that. And he doesn't shy away from those less exciting parts of project management either, like gathering requirements, which can be a real pain sometimes.
Oh, yeah, requirements gathering.
Yeah.
Every project manager has a horror story about that.
Hazelton provides a structured approach, though. He stresses identifying all the stakeholders, defining the project scope really clearly, gathering those requirements through different methods, documenting them thoroughly, and then validating them to make sure they're accurate and feasible.
That's a lot of steps.
But
I can see how it would be worth it in the end. If you get those requirements right from the start, you're setting yourself up for success.
He's a big believer in an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And he also gives you guidance on designing the project solution, taking those requirements and turning them into an action plan.
Okay, so like taking that abstract vision and making it concrete. Does he give you specific steps for that design process?
He emphasizes looking at different solutions, evaluating them carefully, and then choosing the best one, based on a clear set of criteria. And of course, communication is key, making sure that solution is documented and communicated clearly to everyone involved.
So it's not just about having a good idea, it's about making sure everyone understands it and buys into it. Does he talk about the development phase too?
Yeah, he does. He offers some advice on handling the challenges that come up during development, things like regular communication, monitoring progress, managing risks and issues, allocating resources, and always being ready to adapt to changes.
It's like he's written a project management survival guide.
Pretty much. And he even goes into detail about project testing. He's a big advocate for testing continuously throughout the entire project lifecycle, not just at the end.
That makes a lot of sense. Catching those bugs early on can save a lot of time and money. Does he have any specific recommendations for setting up a testing process?
He says it's important to define your testing goals up front, create detailed test cases, and document the results really carefully. He also offers some guidance on choosing the right testing tools and techniques for each project.
It's like he's thought of everything. Maybe we should send Hazelton a thank you note for saving future project managers from all those headaches.
I second that. His attention to detail and practical advice are really invaluable.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into project mechanics. We've covered a ton of ground, from defining project scope to navigating stakeholder communication to managing those inevitable bumps in the road.
Yeah, Hazelton provides a really comprehensive framework for success. And he reminds us that project management is both an art and a science.
It's not just about following rules or using fancy tools. It's about leadership communication, problem solving, and adaptability. Mark Hazelton's work is definitely worth checking out for any IT leader or project manager who who wants to up their game and deliver amazing projects.
If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to explore the source material. There's a lot of great stuff in there.
And let us know what you think. What resonated with you? What are you excited to try out in your own projects? Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.